Kendyll and I recently had the pleasure of receiving an invitation to meet with the cast and crew at a rehearsal of an upcoming production of Into the Woods at Silver Lake Regional High School in Pembroke, Massachusetts. Kelly DePasqua, their director, had ordered a bunch of copies of my book, and the kids had read and passed them around for a week or so. We drove down from Maine and watched them run through the show's prologue. Then we gathered up, and here's the first part of our visit before we opened up the discussion. These kids are on their way to a great production. Your show is going to be amazing, but we're not driving down here every other night for 3 weeks. We're busier people now. I read this book last night for the first time in a good while, even about a year or so. And when I do any kind of event like this, I think it's important to show up knowing the material being discussed. Okay. So I know why you're really here, and we'll just get right to it. Here she is. It's the scary, smart 6-year-old from the book. She now applies her gifts of kindness and compassion to the field of children's health with a kind of love and caring that reflects directly the love and caring she received as a child from more people than I could name, whose hearts went out to her, especially all the wonderful people from the 1996 public theater production of Into the Woods described in my book. Their love comes down through time in Kendyll's work and in her life. We are here to represent the people who will be watching your show. This show in particular has a high potential to take your audience out of the theater and into, if you'll excuse the expression, any possible dark and scary woods of their own. We are here as examples of the rich possibilities you now hold in your hands. You can see why I've only done 2 shows. Different theaters. There can be a moment in a song when the line between you and your character starts to blur, and you become that character to the point where people's perceptions can start to bend, and somebody in those seats can start feeling the line dissolve between their present reality and the world you have brought to life and drawn them into, with help from Sondheim and Lapine. And their willing suspension of disbelief becomes more like a hijacking, and your show transports them to that time when maybe they strayed from the path, or did something they're not proud of, or struck out in anger, or suddenly recognized the real full import of a loss. Any contribution of yours could be that last grain of sand that tips your production into something really transcendent. And I would say take risks and don't think of avoiding mistakes. And you ever really seen a mishap that didn't gain sympathy from the audience? I've always observed that if they already like you, a mishap will make them like you more. But if they don't like you, a mishap will make them immediately like you. Your skill is proven if you are here. And you should get out there and go for it. And I say that as a person who has been in 2 shows.
So I have kind of a bookend to our Out of the Woods story that some of you read. A few years back, we actually went to visit the outdoor theater where we saw Into the Woods all those years ago. That was a side trip. We were taking a trip to see Finding Neverland at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge. I see some of you nodding. That's amazing. And I did not know that story. It's based on J.M. Barrie's writing of Peter Pan and his life. So we were driving to Boston from Maine, and we got to the Charles River, and we were parking, and we were walking along this little wooded path toward the theater, and I could feel that some of my biggest memories of my life were like starting to get a little closer. And in my head, I have it almost like this in my head, the lights and the seats and just this like big, magnificent place. And we turned the corner, and we're there after 18 years, and it's like totally abandoned. It was falling apart. There was, graffiti everywhere and litter, and we stood there for a while and soaked it all in, and I felt a little taken aback looking at it in its decrepit state. It just felt so different. And we talked about it as if it were hallowed ground to us. Because the theater was dead, but the things that happened there live on every day in our changed lives. And I know that's true, and so does my dad. So finding it like that was very strange. But we continued our journey onto the American Repertory Theater to see the new show, and again, I had no idea what I was in for. So
Just thinking about it.
yeah, he orchestrated this whole thing. But we see the first half, and it's a great show, fun music, and people falling in love, and families, and it was wonderful. So we spent intermission talking about, this is so great, the music, the acting, kind of like how we did during the first time we saw Into the Woods there. And then we go back after intermission, and everything shifted, and the love story got a little sad because the woman that J.M. Barrie loved got sick, and then she died. But her death scene in that show was one of the most incredible things I'd ever seen. It was this music and the glitter and the swirling vortex of air rising as high as the stage, and it was like the most exquisite thing I'd ever seen. It's happening. So we leave, and I couldn't talk because of this, and we walk back through Harvard campus trying to choke back tears, and Dad finally said, that last scene was so beautiful, and that's how it really is when someone you love is so sick and suffering, and then they finally let go. And it can really be that beautiful. So, of course, instantly I started Googling how that swirling vortex of air happened. And it turns out that it's someone's whole job. This guy named Daniel Wurtzel was a sculptor in traditional materials. And he was walking by a subway grate one day and saw a red maple leaf floating, stuck in the wind above the grate. And he thought that it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and he wanted to know how he could do this. So he turned it into his career, and he followed that passion, and his resume is incredible. He did the closing ceremony for the Olympics. He's done all these amazing things just from a random encounter with a maple leaf in a subway grate. And I thought it was so poignant that randomly, we encountered his work in the theater, and I felt so profoundly impacted all this time after my first experience being transformed by the theater. So if you have a beautiful idea, do your idea, because you never know where it will take you. And it's better if it's in a theater because you can share it with people. That's my say.
The image of the maple leaf, if it has a familiar ring, you might be thinking of my book cover. If you've read it, you saw the recurring image of the maple leaf. If you remember the maple leaf, it was at the memorial service. I'm holding her. She's 3 weeks old. I'm looking out the window, and there was a maple sapling, spindly maple sapling held up with strings, and it was so red. And I think we did the book 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I thought, where's that sapling? I drive by it every day, and I never thought about it again. I went up with I brought a tape measure, a stick, and a calculator, and I measured the height of the shadow of the stick, and then did some calculations and calculated the height of the sapling. It was 70 feet tall. When she was an adult, and that sapling was a majestic tree that stood over the village and is now like a sentinel over our village, and how it's grown into something so beautiful and so imperceptibly. I drove by it every day for 20 years, and everybody's like, oh my God, look, the sapling's a goddamn... Never did. And you should see that thing now. Do me a favor and think in those terms. The point we're trying to make is that it's those little things that make a difference in the cumulative effect of all the bits of effort, the extra effort and adjustments that you'll have to make. If you nail all those little things, it'll all come together in a way that will just go beyond imagining.